Oh, the whole thing just bugged out. But we are back. It is week one review time. We have been slacking on our four-part series and even our week one preview. But we are here for our week one review and our week two preview. Um, Back here with my boy Jacob.
Yes,
Fun
sir.
week one for some of us, really anti-fun for others. Myself included on that one. But I think week one, we can just kind of jump in. We're going to do our review first, go through some things, and then hit our preview. You did the order. Thank Jake once again for setting this all up. And you picked the upset of the week, if not the upset of the season, for our first game. Big T versus Lamb Chop. Why did you pick this game as your big time game one and week one?
Well, considering we both picked the under on 2 wins for Lamb Chop, figured him winning by 50 points qualified for him to get the most talk this week. It was very interesting. Apparently, one of our things that we thought was that he had no wide receivers. I think his receivers scored the most points, so right about that one. And then Jaden Daniels is the truth in fantasy, at least.
No, and I mean, I think Jaden Daniels looked pretty decent just in reality. Now, granted, I don't watch football, I just watch Red Zone. So in Red Zone, everyone looks okay. But I his team just put up 143 points in week one, which it's week one, so bad, good, everything's with a grain of salt. But holy cow, I would have predicted it took him 2.5 weeks to get to 150 points.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he has some good players on his team, so I don't know. I mean, I don't think he's going to get 60 points out of his quarterbacks many weeks, but you never know, I suppose. Baker did look pretty good. I tend to disagree with you on Jaden. I don't think he looked that good quarterback wise week one, but um, when you're at 88 for 88 yards and score 2 rushing touchdowns, then fantasy is going to be looking good for sure.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's probably fair. Like I said, I watch Red Zone, and he was fun to watch on Red Zone. But I think the wide receivers, Jaden Reed putting up 31 in Brazil, and then Xavier Worthy Thursday night putting up another 20. I think I texted maybe you, or I texted someone, wow, he's making that Brian Thomas selection that we all had look stupid. And then Brian Thomas went off and had a great game as well. But, you know, Bowers did okay. Lad McConkey got into the end zone. Lamon had the week of the year. It's probably not going to ever be this good again for him this season, is my guess. But, even Bucky Irving got some touches on his bench. Which crazy is he could have had another like 5 points if he started Bucky Irving over Algier. And it does kind of look like Algier may be done uh, getting as many carries as he did in the previous system in Atlanta.
Yeah, still hard to tell. I mean, they were losing for a lot of that game. Bijan's definitely more of a receiving back than Algier, so could be different in different situations. I don't think it's quite clear who the goal line back there is yet, so that could be something Algier could be good at. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. He has a lot of potential, obviously, a lot of young players. He did a great job, picked the perfect lineup this week, pretty much. I don't think you could start Bucky Irving week one anyway. Trey Benson didn't look that bad. Yeah, other than that, I think it should be interesting. If he had a better running back crew or if some injuries happen the right way, he could be somewhat interesting moving forward. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I think with that, we can bump over to Tom, who had a decent week, although there are already problems afoot for him. And I will like to say that the Jake curse has reared its head once again. not only yesterday did you talk nonsense about Austin Wells and then he hit a double and a 3-run home run, but during our draft review, you made fun of Tom for his Jacoby Brissett pick, and Jacoby Brissett may be starting for him next week because you said no chance he ever starts, but Love being out and now Russ being out, and all of a sudden Jacoby Brissett is a starter for Tom next week, which the Jake curse reared its head so early on that one, which is hilarious to me.
Fair enough. I don't know. I still think New England shouldn't be starting him, but they can do what they want with their team, I suppose. And they won, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah, that was quite the upset.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with Joe Burrow, but things don't seem to be quite the same. But we can talk about that later. Other than that, I think Drake London is starting to get a little scary. I do like Drake London. It's just been not much going on for like 3 years now, I guess. So it's hard to kind of see the path at this point. Not sure. I might be starting Neighbors next week if I'm Tom. But we'll see, I guess.
It's so funny because forever you've been fairly high on Drake London and I've been fairly low on Drake London. And now that you're kind of saying, well, maybe it's the over, maybe maybe there's a problem there. I'm like, well, new system, new stuff. I think he's got more competition in that room now. I'm a big Darnell Mooney guy that they just brought in there as like a third receiver. I think Chicago was like a bad place for him, and like I think you said on talking about Fields previously, can't really support multiple wide receivers as a QB. So, I think give London a few more weeks, kind of see what this year Atlanta looks like, new quarterback. Although Cousins didn't look good. He looked the opposite of good. But he does have Neighbors, and he does have Jameson Williams, who sat on his bench and put up 22 for the Lions. And, that's really interesting. And then, I think his running back, there's some stuff to be said. Breece Hall and Derrick Henry, you probably start every week, but Aaron Jones looked pretty good against the Giants, to be fair. Although the Giants' defense isn't terrible. The Giants' offense is. But anyway, so I like his running back situation. And then I don't know what you do with Cole Kmet being your starting tight end. Theo Johnson was his best tight end this week as a first week tight end, 4th-round pick for the second worst offense in the league.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting, see what he does. I think Tom still has picks and stuff, so I don't know. To be fair, I almost no tight end did anything this week, so it didn't kill Tom. Kmet still has, if Chicago could turn around the offense, Kmet still has some upside, so not the end of the world at this point, but something to keep an eye on moving forward.
Yeah, I thought Tom still had Gesicki, but he doesn't. And I know they ruled that it wasn't a catch, but his catch in the back of the end zone was bonkers for that touchdown this week, if anybody hadn't seen it. But anyway, I think we can move on to our game 2, unless you had anything more about Tom.
Got something.
No, I switched it.
Okay.
So this game brings us to, I wanted to be sad for a while before. But anyway, we have Mitchell versus myself in your order. We go from one of the best scorers in the league with Lemon to by far the worst with yours truly. The Mighty Marvin Power Rangers, which is super clever, by the way, did not do very good, including Mighty Marvin himself. Even though he's wide open and Kyler doesn't throw to him, it's fine. But it just looked bad. So I didn't start the right running backs, which is fair. Brian Robinson sat on my bench. Najee looked okay. Etienne, again, I paid too much for him, and he looked fine. But I'm in trouble at QB. I'm in trouble at running back, and I need to figure out what to do at wide receiver. And there's a lot of trouble going on with the Power Rangers that are Mighty Marvins. So I don't know how you felt about my week, but I was pretty depressed about it.
Yeah, it's somewhat interesting. I don't think, at least so far, the running backs have turned out the way you probably wanted them to. Not sure what the exact situation is with Swift. I mean, he played a lot of snaps, so maybe there's some upside there moving forward. But Najee had a good game. I think, like you said, Brian Robinson had a good game. I don't know which one. It's probably a hard decision where you're going there moving forward. Tight end looks like you might have a problem. Ferguson's probably out for a few weeks with the MCL. Not sure how much you trust Freiermuth, who's the second option for, it seems like, a Justin Fields offense at this point. I'm not really sure about that, but yeah, I mean, brighter days moving forward. Jefferson didn't have a crazy game. I'd expect him to do better. Marvin's going to do better. Same with DJ Moore, but I think your biggest problem is probably, I think there should start to be some real questions about how good Trevor Lawrence exactly is. He's had enough time in the league at this point. He's been good, not great. So you kind of need him to be a little better for your team to take a next step.
Well, yes and no, and it doesn't super matter for fantasy why he struggles, but in reality, that's one game I actually paid a bunch of attention to. The offensive line just fell apart, like absolutely, just might as well have laid down. And then like his receiving core, other than Brian Thomas, looked terrible. Christian Kirk dropped 2 third-down passes, like it just looked weirdly terrible. And I think that hurt him a good amount. But Brian Thomas looks good, so that's fun. I will say I'm much more worried about Kirk Cousins because that dude does not look like he can walk. He sat in that pocket, and it didn't look like he took more than 3 steps on any play this week. So I'm a little nervous for that one. But it's week 1. We're gonna take it with a grain of salt. And we're going to move on to Mitchell. I know you had some real thoughts about Joe Burrow. I think Mitch has some real question marks at the quarterback position. So I don't know who you want to start with Burrow, you want to start with Levis. Go ahead.
I think we combine the two. I mean, Burrow, it's just been a kind of weird year and a game at this point. Just kind of hoping for him to get back to where he was at a few years ago at this point. But I definitely think you're starting to have some thoughts creep into your head about what are these injuries? Are they longer term injuries? Is he affected career wise rather than just like last year you could give away with the whole whatever, he had the knee at the start of the year and then he had the wrist, but now it's kind of like, all right, you've had a year, like it's still looking the same. You still had Jamar out there, you had that other receiver, you may not have T, but there was enough out there for you to beat the Patriots. So, and then Levis, I think you just have questions in general about. So I think that's kind of where you're at there. I feel like Chris might have accidentally, not accidentally, but he fell off this call, I'm pretty sure. So I'm just going to keep going now. We're going to have fun. Anyway, so still Mitch had a pretty good game. He had the running backs to support him. He had A-Chain go for 19, White went for 13, and Connor went for 17. That's a really good crew he's got there. 2 really good receivers with A.J. Brown and Debo. Debo's going to have a really good year this year, I think. Just the holdout for Ayuk, I think he's going to get a lot more targets. Seems like McCaffrey is somewhat injured, so that's going to help his upside. And then Kincaid, are you back now? I guess not. Kincaid was somewhat disappointing this week. but it should be better moving forward. And Njoku got hurt, so that's kind of an iffy situation for Mitchell, but I think tight end wise, he'll be okay. He was pretty good this week. I expect him to actually be better moving forward. I can't tell if Chris.
All right, so it looks like we're back. Yeah. Sorry about that, everyone. We had technical difficulties where I lost internet, and so I have no idea what recorded and what didn't. Jake thinks that we're good on everything else, and he's going to edit this so that it's all put together properly because he's good at that. But I think that does lead us to a kind of a perfect segue. As we talked about earlier, we are now getting very popular on the YouTube where we're even getting our own sponsors. And so I think Jake has to play our sponsor video because he's our tech support. So we're going to play our sponsored video now. Hopefully you guys all enjoy. Oh, wow, I see myself. I hope there's sound because I don't hear nothing. So, as everyone can see, we were sponsored by Brisk this week. Not really. But that is a new commercial that is now out there with our own league member, Trevor. He is the voice of the man that gets eaten by the bear with the Doja Cat lady. And so congratulations, Trevor, and thank you for letting us pretend that Brisk sponsored our video by you being in said commercial. Congratulations, Trevor.
Congrats to Trevor. All right, back to fantasy football. I think the next game is Jack Attack versus Cooks. So
yeah, a little bit of a Stony Brook game.
Yeah, I think these are the two most successful Stony Brook teams so far, cumulatively. Multiple owners for the Jack Attack team, but has stayed competitive throughout no matter what. So looking at it, tough week for kind of both of them. Much lower than they usually score. I think much lower than they will score moving forward, probably. Looking at Cam's side, since he won first, he has Jalen and Dak. Dak was a little underwhelming, but they were blowing out Cleveland because Deshaun Watson can't play football anymore, apparently. So he'll be better moving forward. Jalen was decent, not great. That's probably different moving forward as well. I think the big news for Cam is that Diggs seems to still be somewhat Diggs. I mean, it's mostly on touchdowns this week. Not a huge yardage week, so still somewhat questions in the air on Diggs probably. I think he put him on the trade block this week. I'm not positive about that, but interesting to see what someone's willing to pay for Diggs, what he's willing to take for Diggs. DK is starting to get a little scary. I think there's real questions about what Jacksonville player Cam is starting moving forward. So lots of questions in the air on Cam's side, but
yeah, and I think, even running back wise, he made the right decisions this week, but there's some scariness there too. It feels like Cam is in the perfect position to just get it wrong, and no fault to Cam's at all. But I think we've seen it in this league 100 times, whether it be you or Mitch, you just end up playing the wrong player. He didn't this week. Great job. Oh, I guess he did because Mason had 22 points sitting on his bench. But like Singletary and Zamir White didn't do much. But next week, do you start Mason? Assuming CMC's out, but assuming he is playing, do you start Zamir? Do you start Singletary? Do you just roll with Ford and them? So I mean, he's in a rough spot there. And I mean, it's better spot than other people are in. Don't get me wrong, but you do open yourself up to just getting that question wrong. QB, I think you hit it. Dak was up by a boatload, and Hurts was fine. Diggs showed some things. It looked like he may have gotten some of that what was like Tank Dell route tree last year. And then DK still getting outplayed by Tyler Lockett. 6 years in now is a little questionable and not really understanding how that happens. But like you said, is Brian Thomas the new starter? Possibly. Because even at tight end, Evan Ingram didn't look great this week. So Cam gets a win, not doing great. That's kind of wonderful for him, and that's really where you want to be sitting. If you're him, 1-0 is better than where Taint is sitting on the other side. It's wild to me he changed his team name because his name should be Taint. But going on to his side, you have to assume
his name is still Taint. It's just his team name's different.
Well, that's not allowed. There are rules here, Taint. He chose to start Jamar Chase after all the question marks of whether Jamar was going to start or not. And I think he's got some interesting propositions here. His quarterbacks, again, didn't do what you'd expect, but Herbert and Purdy really only both put up 10. I know he didn't start Purdy, but there wasn't much else he was going to do there. He started the running backs he probably should have started. Everyone assumed Spears was going to get a bigger run than he did. Here's hoping, at least for Taint's sake, that Spears is becoming RB1. But it didn't look like it this week. And so, Taint had a rough week. I think there are still some question marks there. I think Chase is going to remain a question mark with Burrow looking like he does. I think Pittman doesn't kill you ever, but he really doesn't raise the bar too much. So I think there's some questions for Taint, especially given that he has 0 draft capital. So he really needs to pursue some wins, and I think that's possible. You got to assume his QB and wide receiver situation is usually better than it was this week.
Yeah, I think even running back, Kyron's probably a little better than he was this week. Gibbs, I think, is probably where he was this week. And then Chase, you expect to probably score 6 more points or so. So you're probably looking at like 15, 20 more points, but that's going to win you some weeks, not going to win you other weeks. Herbert's situation isn't great, so you can't really rely on him being amazing. He's probably, starting wise, I'd probably put him 3rd on Taint's roster at this point. I'd be starting Purdy and Tua over him moving forward generally. So interesting to see how he'll play the quarterbacks. I think flex is somewhat of an issue for him. And also, tight end's not great, but seems like no one's tight end is great. So you can't really complain too much about that.
Yeah. I think with that, we can move on to the next game, the next sadness for you. But in reality, Biondi ends up beating you 102-82, 20 points. Going to start with Biondi. Dude, I know Anthony Richardson put up damn near 30 points. He is so scary to watch play football. He threw up 2 balls that Alec Pierce just goes and gets, and the rest of it looks terrifying. He runs, it scares me. He throws, it scares me. He got supplemented by the rushing touchdown that he bowled over 3 people, which is awesome. But he just scares me so much, and I wish it was more. And then his other QB situation is tough. Both Deshaun and Bryce Young look like they forgot what a football was, and so I don't know what he does with QB there, because his QB situation just scares me in general. Richardson for different reasons than the other 2.
Yeah, Richardson only had 9 completions. It's kind of crazy you score 30 points with 9 completions as a quarterback, but he has his own way of doing things. I know he had a rushing touchdown this week that I think it was more of a scramble than like a Jalen Hurts tush push kind of deal. So he's going to have to get that goal line role really to be a QB1, I feel like. I can't imagine he's completing. I don't know what his completion percentage is for his career, but I imagine it's hardly over 50% if it's over 50%. So he's an interesting player. I mean, he's really good in fantasy. So as many weeks as he's playing, he'll probably be a QB1, I guess. But the other quarterbacks are looking rough. Deshaun looked terrible. I know he had some off the field situations that happened before the game, and then another one that popped up on Monday. So don't want to really talk about that much, but the running backs for Biondi are pretty awesome. He's got running backs on his bench that would start for almost every team pretty much. So that situation's good. And then, yeah, the Puka news is hard, but he still has, I think, Nico Collins on the bench, so that shouldn't be a problem moving forward.
Yeah, so an update on that is Richardson has a 57% completion rating in his career, all 5 games. I knew that off the dome. I definitely did not look it up while you were talking. So, yeah, his running back situation is awesome. I don't know if I trust Kamara or J.K. Dobbins or even Mixon to do what they did this week. I'm probably most confident about Mixon out of that bunch. But did Trevor now steal Devontae Adams and some draft capital? Because he trades Puka and immediately Puka goes to the IR. You're right. He does have Nico Collins. It now means Nico and Olave are automatic starts for Biondi pretty much every week. And then again, I guess we can just keep saying it. Tight end, if you don't score a touchdown, then you're bad. On the other hand, we go to you, the person with, was he the highest scoring tight end this week? Is Isaiah Likely with 22?
I could tell you.
Is he tight end uno?
He is.
He is tight end 1. So Jake had the one good tight end all week and started Mark Andrews instead of him. So, your team, you ended up starting Fields over Derek Carr, which was wrong. You ended up starting Fields over Sam Darnold, which was wrong. You now have 4 quarterbacks and still refuse to give me back Sam Darnold, which is rude. But anyway, your team underperformed slightly, I would say, at the running back and wide receiver positions, but nothing too crazy. And then, your flex and your tight end spot really hurt you. But in reality, you had some guys on the bench that looked pretty good, whether you put Pitts at a flex or even, you go Moss or Zeke. Amazingly, still saying Zeke looked okay. But, I mean, that was a touchdown driven, but feels like flex is a really touchdown driven spot.
Yeah, I don't think there's major problems moving forward. I don't know what to do with tight end position at this point. I mean, I don't really want to start Likely or Andrews because I feel like I'm just going to go wrong. I feel like they're just going to share that. I'm going to be wrong every week. So maybe we're back on the Kyle Pitts train again, like I am every year, and he's going to disappoint me next week by getting 0, but that'll be fun. Thanks to T. Higgins for having paper hamstrings. I appreciate that. End of the week, he definitely would have started over Amari, and hopefully Jameis Winston gets that job so I can get my 5th quarterback.
If you have 5 quarterbacks and you don't give me Sam Darnold, I will be very mad. Everyone knows I love me some Sammy Darnold. Or at least give Jameis to Biondi. One of those two, and I'm a happy camper.
You never know.
I think we can move on to our last game. We have Trevor, who helped sponsor this video. Oh, your voice isn't saying words.
It's not the last game.
What? But... Oh my God, I skipped Trent and Skull Daddy. Oh no. Trent and Skull Daddy.
Yeah, Trent and Skull Daddy. Big blowout this week. I think Mr. Trent probably has the favorite for this year at this point. Yeah, those receivers are really good. Cooper Kupp had 21 targets this week. That's crazy. That's really crazy. But when Puka's out, he's probably going to average like 15 targets a game. Tyreek always averages 12. His running backs are really good. Quarterbacks are really good. So, yeah, Trent is really good. And kind of starting to see possibly a decline in Skullcap's team. Some of the running backs have gotten a little old. Kelsey's a little old.
Can
Yes?
we back up? I have to
Sure.
disagree with some of the Trent things before we move on
Okay.
to the Skull Daddy things.
Go ahead.
So I think Trent is great. I think Cooper Kupp having 21 targets is awesome, but Matthew Stafford also threw the ball 50 times. So, like, rare occurrence. I get the Puka injury. Trent is wonderful with this starting lineup. The problem with Trent is if one of these people aren't there, it becomes problematic. He doesn't have too much behind that in the sense of running back or wide receiver. And he has no other quarterback. Um,
I disagree.
but that's
Tank
because you
Bigsby.
like Ayuk and Tank Dell.
Tank Bigsby had 12 carries for 73 yards this week. That's pretty impressive. And then Dowdle still had a workload. I think the Gibson experiment's probably over at this point. Seems like Ramondre has that job pretty locked down. But I mean, Tank Dell pretty much picking up somewhat where he left off. 3 catches for 47 targets. That's more than Diggs had this week. Ayuk, he was wide receiver 9 last year, and then Terry's always pretty solid. So he has plenty behind there as backup options, but this is a good starting lineup.
Well, he may have been 9 last year. But he's like 82 this year. And money.
Again,
And,
week 1, and he just reported. So, Chris is bowing out again. All right, time for me to take back over, guys. Just like everyone likes it. So, looking at Skullcap's team, he still has 2 really good quarterbacks. You'd expect Goff to be a lot better moving forward. He still has Geno behind them just in case. Obviously, missing McCaffrey this week, that's a big loss. So you're really, that's where a lot of the points he lost are. I think the problem is RB2 is looking kind of rough right now. I guess you're looking Austin Eckler. I don't know if you could count for 4 receptions for 52 yards every week. That seems like a lot to ask for. Hubbard, I expect him to be a little better, but maybe in a different week he would be a little better. I think he still had the workload, so I guess that's kind of your RB2 situation right now, but you're really not looking forward to that. Kelsey seems like they're just not using him in the regular season quite as much, so really Skullcap's team is quarterbacks and receivers at this point. Are you back, Chris? All right. Chris is not back, guys. Oh, he's back now. You here?
I am.
Okay.
I'm super annoyed at this Wi-Fi. That I was coming in and out. It sounded like you were doing fine.
Yeah, I pretty much covered Skullcap. Basically said his team's really looking like quarterbacks and receivers now. RB2 situation's looking rough. McCaffrey being injured is really rough for him. So interesting to see how the injuries play out. I don't know if you have
It sounds like Sean is on tank mode. It's coming up here soon. He is old. It's time to trade.
All right. Now we'll move to the game you were so happy to get to.
I was happy to get to it because Trevor was in a commercial and we can be proud of him. He's finally doing things. He's finally becoming rich and taking us on fun vacations. We've been friends with him all these years so that we can use his fame to get us things. And it's finally coming true. So anyway, Um, Trevor gets the win over Danny. I also didn't realize Danny scored less than me. So, yay, I'm not last. Anyway, freaking Saquon went bonkers now that he has a decent team around him. And Ramondre Stevenson looked pretty good. And the rest of Trevor's team was fine. Aaron Rodgers and Danny Jones are still really bad at quarterback. And yeah, that's about it. The rest of his team, not great. But his running back that started, awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he has one of the best running back duos probably at this point. I mean, Saquon looks like he's going to go crazy this year, so glad I traded him. You're welcome, Trevor. I still don't really regret it personally, to be honest, but this week certainly hurt a little bit. Other than that, I think the Ramondre not sharing is really good news for Trevor. I think his receiver is going to be a lot better the rest of the season. Garrett Wilson still had 11 targets. You imagine Devontae gets more targets moving forward. And I'm not sure what he's going to really do in the flex, but that's kind of a position you can figure out. Moving on to Danny's team. Yeah, kind of same story. We keep talking about it. I don't want to harp on it. Just no production from the running back situation. You probably would have wanted more from Warren. Seems like his role is diminished this year. Arthur Smith loves Cordell Patterson for some reason. So he's going to keep using him, and it seems like that's taking from Warren rather than Najee. The quarterbacks didn't perform like he'd expect, but they'll be better moving forward. But it's going to be rough if you're just getting literally like under 10 points from your running backs combined every week.
All I'm saying is, if he had picked Trey Benson over Blake Corum, he would have had more points than me.
Well, maybe he's not trying to have more points than you.
I was just saying he wouldn't be last right now if he would have made the right call. But you and him want to go for Blake Corum. That's not on me. Yeah, I think you covered Danny otherwise. I just wanted to point out that 1-0 Benson versus Corum.
Sounds good. All right. Well, we didn't do any picks, so we don't have any losses so far this year. We've made no picks that were wrong. So yeah, go with us.
To be fair, in my pick'em thing that I'm in, and you have to pick 5 based on the spread, I went 5-0 this week. So I'm really good at picking regular football. Really bad at picking fantasy football. So let's get it started up in here's.
Yep. Sounds good. No reason to go over the standings. Week 1, Trent's the top and Beyondy's the top. So those are the 2 tops in the division so far. Looks like you want to go over the standings.
No, I was misreading this picks record thing. I didn't know we were just skipping it. I thought those were including this week's games because I didn't study this beforehand. And so I was just staring at it being like, those aren't the games this week, and was very confused. So, yeah, I'm good not going over the standings.
Okay. Moving forward, I guess I'll do my weekly rankings since I did them first. I had Trent first after talking a lot of crap about Trent. You also have Trent first, so
I do.
So you're welcome. Seems like I'm right there. Other than that, I moved on. I had Beyondy in second place.
I also did. I'm not writing him right now.
All right. Well, Beyondy, I feel like every situation other than quarterback is pretty solidified. I know Beyondy still has some draft capital, so if he wants to address quarterback, he probably can. And yeah, I really like his team moving forward. I had Mitch third. That's probably a hot take, but I like Mitch's team. Still kind of believe in Burrow, but a little more wary now than I was before the year. So Mitch, I have you third, buddy. I think he probably has the best running back wide receiver combination, I guess. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, I have what's his name? I have Cam third. I have Mitch fourth though.
Okay. Well, I have Cam sixth, so I guess that's a discrepancy. I just don't trust his running backs. I don't really trust fully the wide receivers at this point. Diggs had 2 touchdowns this week, but only 6 targets, 6 catches. Pretty good week overall. Not a lot of yards. Not sure how the target share is going to work out there. And then I don't know what's happening in Seattle, but DK continues to disappoint after a bad year last year. So just a little down on Cam's team in general.
I just like Cam, so he's third.
I love the analysis. Moving to fourth for me, I had Skullcap where you had Mitch. Still feel like quarterbacks somewhat rule the day. Lamar's probably going to be a top 3 quarterback this year. I like Goff this year a decent amount. Still think his receivers are really good. And then whenever McCaffrey gets back, he's kind of worth 2 running backs anyway. So
Yeah, I put Sean at 8. Mostly because I think it's time for Sean to start figuring out what he needs to do for tanking, and because I was in a silly mood when I wrote these a really long time ago and not right this second without much thought. Moving on to 5, I had Tommy. He had a big upset this week, but I don't think that takes too much away from him. I think he's still one of the better teams in the league. Who knows what Russ and Love become, but I think he can maintain some of those issues. And he's certainly better than the team that you put at 5, which is Trevor.
This is my hot take of the power rankings. So I have Trevor at 5. Probably a bad take, but I think the running backs are really good for him. I think his receivers are really good. He has a really good tight ends. It's really just some weakness probably at quarterback. And by probably, I mean like 75% chance they're both pretty weak. There's still some holes. I think I have him pretty high, but I kind of see Trevor buying since he doesn't have his first round pick this year anyway, and doesn't seem like he's getting it back. So he's going to end up buying. I think he fills in some of his needs, and I have him at 5.
Talking about holes, your logic has holes. You've done 5 picks, and 2 of them have been hot takes. That's craziness. Don't just suck up to him now that he's got a commercial and is famous. This is craziness.
Well, I want to get on the yacht, so.
If you're going to do it, you might as well put him 1. Just suck up all the way. You know he doesn't watch enough to go to 5. He can't count that high. He went to Patrides. Gosh. So anyway, number 6, you went with Cam, which is just crazy because I like Cam and he deserves to be higher. And I went with Taint because I think his team is better than it showed. I think he's got a decent quarterback situation. I think Taint just deserves it over some of the players that you've already mentioned, like Sean and Trevor.
Fair enough. I already talked about Cam, so I guess I'll move on to 7. I had Tom there. I like Tom's team a lot. He would be higher if Jordan Love did not get hurt, but Jordan Love did get hurt, so I have him at 7.
That's fair. I have you at 7 because I think that's where you belong. You're better than Sean's team, but worse than Taint's.
Well, I do always finish in 7th place, so that is a pretty good prediction there.
I am very good at this. That brings me to 8th. This is Sean. I've already talked about his team. But yeah, sorry, Sean.
And I had, who did I have? I had Bryce at the.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, I did.
You had Taint. He's only got one name. His name is not Bryce. His name is Taint.
I had Taint. I feel weird about the Bengals situation a little bit. Obviously, that affects Chase. I'm not the biggest Pittman guy, so That's not my cup of tea. I think he has real problems at the flex position, and then the quarterbacks are just in a weird position. I'd have a hard time picking each week. So really comes down to the running backs, and then I'm somewhat scared of injury for both of those guys, and he doesn't have much behind them. So
All right, that brings us to 9, where you put Lamb Chop after his ridiculous week 1, and I put Trevor because this is where he belongs. See, Trevor, I don't suck up. You can talk about.
all right, Chris cut out again. So he had Trevor. I think Trevor deserves to be a little higher, probably. He won this week. I think he has a good chance of winning next week. So I had him a little higher. Lamb Chop. Feel like he just deserved it with a big week. So I put him there. Might end up moving him down further in the year. We'll see what he does. Still has a lot of draft capital. So if he wants to kind of switch off of the tanking, he could do that. Then moving on to 10, I had myself. I guess maybe I should have put myself at 9 and Lamb Chop at 10, but I don't think it matters that much at the end of the day. Had a bad week. I'm not sure what I'm doing at tight end. Quarterback seems a little risky because Kyler wasn't great. And then Chris had himself there. So Chris had himself at 10, and I don't think we need to really talk about that. Really bad week. I guess the two somewhat tanking teams are behind them, so that makes sense. And there we go. I had Lamb Chop higher, so that's why Chris is at 11. Just talked about it myself, so I guess you could talk about it if you want.
No, I'm good. I'm sorry, everyone. My dang brother's home. He must be using up so much Wi-Fi. I've never had this many problems. I'm sitting 3 feet away from an extender. So I don't know what's going on. But I think week 2 preview game of the week, we have the Texas Baylor Bears game with Trent versus Mitch Sikkim. And you had this newfangled way that you wanted to do this, so go ahead, my friend.
All right, so it's a contender battle. Both of them are in the playoffs. Both of them won week 1, so I figured that made sense for the week 1 game of the week. At quarterback, I think it's really favors Trent here. He has Josh Allen. They're going up against Miami, and then Stafford, who's going up against Arizona. I don't think either of those defenses are great. Both those quarterbacks had really big weeks last week. I wouldn't expect them to really fall back, so kind of see him having an advantage there over Burrow and Levis. Hopefully Burrow could get back on track for his sake and then the receiver's sake as well. Levis, I am less confident in. Going up against the Jets secondary, I can't really see a way where this is going to turn out great for them, but perhaps I'm just wrong and the Bears are a lot better.
Yeah, you got to give Trent kind of the big advantage here. I mean, Burrow has shown up against Kansas City in the past. I don't have full faith in the Kansas City defense, but Burrow needs to kind of prove himself again. But Josh Allen against Miami has all the makings of what could be, a shootout. Which is great for fantasy, kind of similar to what Stafford did last week. I think Stafford probably takes a step back against Arizona compared to, like I said, he threw 50 passes against Detroit. I don't think that's going to happen. But if I'm Mitch, I seriously consider not starting Levis this week. He scored 8 last week, and he's playing against the Jets, who have a pretty solid defense, probably one of the better defenses in the league. So, yeah, I think big advantage quarterback goes to Trent. While at running back, I kind of think it's really close, but I do give Mitch the slight advantage with Achane and Rachaad White. A-Chain's against Buffalo, and Rachaad White is at Detroit. Jacobs in Indy, and then he's got Pacheco in Cincinnati. Pacheco needed a touchdown to be viable last week. Jacobs looked okay his first week in Green Bay. A-Chain looks like he's going to get a crap load of work, which surprises me. And hopefully he stays healthy given his size. And Rachaad White looked, he's going to get a crap load of work as well. So I think I give the advantage running back wise to Mitch slightly.
I have a pretty big advantage for Mitch at running back. I think Jacobs will be hurt by the fact Malik Willis is starting this week. So see that as a downside. Pacheco didn't look amazing last week. Like you said, needed a touchdown. If that doesn't happen, he's really not fantasy viable last week that much. I think White and A-Chain are going to be really valuable each week. So I have a pretty big advantage there. I somewhat agree with you on the super flex. He could definitely start Pollard there if you wanted to. So interesting to see if that's a move he decides to make or not. Moving on to receiver, I think this is a really close battle for me. Tyreek Hill and Cooper Kupp, probably the best wide receiver duo, but Mitch is really not far behind. I'm pretty high on Debo given how late Ayuk reported to camp. So I could see this kind of being almost even the way I see it. Not sure how you see it.
I'm going to go with a little bit of a hot take and say that Mitch outscores Trent wide receiver wise this week. I don't think Cooper Kupp does what he did last week. I think while Puka being out theoretically means that Kupp does much better, it also means that you're now almost on a double at Kupp every play because there's no reason not to. You don't have that person on the other side that's taking some of that coverage away. You shade the coverage towards Cooper Kupp. And like I said, I don't think Stafford's going to throw the ball 100 times again. Hill against Buffalo. The Buffalo defense really scares me a little bit for their own football playoff future. But, it's crazy to think he's going to do worse this week when he was in handcuffs an hour before kickoff on Sunday. But gotta love A.J. Brown, even against that pretty decent Atlanta defense. And I think Debo really, kind of shines a little bit in the offense right now for San Francisco. You've got a hobbled McCaffrey and an Ayuk who showed up late. So I think, Debo consistently is a top 10 wide receiver in football, even though no one really notices because he runs the ball and does all these other things, but fantasy-wise anyway. So hot take, maybe not too hot, but I think Mitch outscores him a little bit this week.
Okay. That is hot. But yeah. Moving on, two young tight ends, both drafted last year. Trent has Laporta and Mitch has Kincaid. Kincaid had a really bad week one. I'd expect that to be better in week two. Probably the same for Laporta though. You have to give the advantage to Trent here. Laporta was injured in the offseason, so could still be getting back up to speed a little bit. I think the running backs had all the touchdowns last week in Detroit, so could see that flipping over a little bit. So I definitely would give the advantage to Trent.
I think Jameson Williams had one.
Okay.
But I might be wrong. I might be wrong about that. So you say I have to give the advantage to Trent. I disagree. My take on this is that this position just does not matter. I don't think either one of these tight ends comes out and plays great this week. It sounds like Dawson Knox is still the tight end who's going to receive the ball in Buffalo. He's not tight end one on any depth chart, but Kincaid, Dawson Knox seems to be the guy that's running more routes than Kincaid, but that's just from eye test, and I can probably be wrong. Like I said, I watched it on Red Zone. So at tight end, I just don't care. I don't think it's important enough in this matchup where either one of these guys break the bank. One's probably going to score 4 more points than the other, and I just don't think it wins or loses you the game. Which I think brings us to flex. right now you have Chris Godwin playing that spot for Trent, while I have James Conner's in that spot for Mitch. As you noted earlier, Pollard's there. Trent could go with one of those other wide receivers you mentioned in the last review, whether it be Tank Dell or somebody else. But I would, theoretically, you give that to the running back. And I'm going to do that here if this is how it looks. I'm going to go James Conner over Godwin. Conner looked actually really, really good for Arizona. He looked better than he's looked in a really long time this week. And Godwin also plenty of touches, and it's against the Detroit team that causes some shootouts. But I think running back is safe, and I think James Conner is more likely to get into the end zone. So I'll go advantage Mitch in the flex.
Yep, I'll also go advantage Mitch there, like you said before. But I will go. Yes, that comes to predictions, and I am picking Mitch. I think the running backs would be too much.
Interesting. I went the opposite way. I am going quarterback. I think that quarterback is going to be such a blowout that even though I think I predicted Mitch in every other position, I don't think it's enough to bring him back with Allen and Stafford compared to Burrow and Levis.
Fair enough. All right, moving on. My next pick for games was my game versus Cam. I think it was one of the higher projected scores, so that's why I picked it. Other than that, I think there's still a lot of questions on both teams. I don't really know what I'm doing at QB2. I think tight end's a weird position for me, and then I talked about it before, but I think Cam's flex is really weird. I think his running back situation you brought up is also pretty weird. So I think there's a lot of questions, but I think it should be an interesting game at least.
Yeah, and going through the positional battles, Kyler starting for you along with Fields or Darnold or Carr, and he's got Jalen Hurts and Dak Prescott. I think you are pretty clearly at a disadvantage here. I think Dak plays New Orleans, who I can't imagine his defense is going to look the same against Dak as it did against Carolina this week. And so I think Dak kind of plays more up to what you'd expect. And then Hurts, again, Atlanta's pretty decent, but I'm still kind of thinking you go Jalen over whoever. Kyler against the Rams is a pretty good matchup for Kyler. The Rams secondary and defense just doesn't look great at all. And then, given that Carr plays the Cowboys and Darnold plays San Francisco, I'd imagine you go Fields. So I'm going to think that Cam has the advantage quarterback-wise.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm struggling. I might go Carr. I might go Fields. I'm not really sure. Probably not going Darnold this week, but it's just a weird situation. I'm sure I'll make the wrong choice, so I'll have that to look forward to next week. But yeah, big advantage for Cam. And moving on to running back. Running back is an interesting one. I have JT and Monty, and Cam has Cook and Ford. I like the JT matchup. I think Green Bay is going to had a pretty rough week last week and not going to have Jordan Love. I could see this being a big week for JT. But then again, you never know. Monty, I mean, he's really always been touchdown reliant, but Detroit scores a lot of points, so maybe he gets another touchdown this week. On Cam's side, seems like Cook still isn't getting the goal line work because Josh Allen takes all of that, and then Ford kind of walked in the end zone in garbage time last week. So I'm going to give the running back advantage to myself, but interested to hear what you think.
I think the running back advantage for you is huge this week. I think JT, like you said, has a really great matchup against Green Bay. He kind of runs into the same problems you mentioned for Cook with Anthony Richardson, getting, he's scrambling from the 4-yard line and bowling over people instead of handing it to JT, whose job that is. And then Monty against Tampa Bay has all the makings of a shootout. I think the Bucks put up 37 or something last week, and we know the Lions put up points. So I would not be surprised if he at least gets into the end zone once. So I think big time advantage for you when it comes to running back. I followed it up by saying I think you've got a big time advantage when it comes to receiver. CeeDee Lamb is still probably a step behind, but is getting there against the New Orleans defense that I don't fully trust. And then I think Waddle could end up having a big day, kind of similar to Tyreek Hill. I think that could be a shootout compared to Diggs and DK at this point. I don't see Diggs maintaining the 2 touchdowns that he did last week that made him viable. And DK is still that big question mark. He's never been Geno's number 1, so it would seem. Geno seems to really spread that ball around pretty well between his 3 wide receivers, which is terrible for DK fantasy value. And so I think you have a pretty decent advantage when it comes to wide receiver.
Yeah, I think this is CD's 3rd week back practicing, so should be somewhat up to speed at this point. Obviously, tough matchup on Lattimore in New Orleans, but CD's one of the top receivers in the league, so you can't really think about matchups too much. Waddle, I mean, I like Waddle a lot, obviously, but I think that Buffalo defense is kind of rough. I think that he might have a big week. I kind of like my receivers as well. I think Chicago's defense is kind of rough, and then I just never know. I mean, DK could have 30, or he could have 5 again. So, knowing my luck, he'll have 30, but I have to pick my receivers in this situation. Moving on, tight ends. Probably not much to talk about. Am I starting Kyle Pitts or one of the Baltimore guys? I don't know, but probably Kyle Pitts because I don't want to pick the wrong Baltimore guy and look stupid again. He's got Evan Ingram. He had a rough week last week going up against Cleveland. I think that's a rough matchup, so probably not a lot of points out of tight end here.
Hot take, Kyle Pitts has a big week this week. Kyle Pitts is going to put up at least 15 against Philly. And I think he's the person to start. Just a gut feeling. I think Evan Ingram is going to have a pretty big bounce back week. That Cleveland offense looks horrid. So there's a good chance Jacksonville's on the field for a good amount of time. The Cleveland defense is great, but I think, this may be a punt game, but that does enable you to get some yards in there, maybe some bend don't break kind of defenses looking out there. And so I'm going to go Pitts as an advantage for you, and I'm predicting a big game out of Kyle, so don't make me wrong, Kyle. From the flex, I think you need to figure that out because that's crazy. And Cam needs to start Brian Thomas. Cam start Brian Thomas. I give Cam the advantage, even though I just said all those things about the Cleveland defense. I thought Brian Thomas looked phenomenal, and it really looks like the first good receiver that, or I'll say really good receiver that Trevor Lawrence has had since he's gotten there. He had 1 or 2 weeks where Ridley looked like that, but Brian Thomas looked great. And so I start Brian Thomas if I'm Cam. And I think that is an advantage over Amari or whoever else crazy thing you're going to put at flex.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I just don't know. I mean, Amari had like 9 or 10 targets last week, so hard to not play him. But at the same time, Deshaun looks kind of done, so maybe I won't start him. I guess Cam gets the advantage there. But prediction-wise, I picked me.
I also picked you. Sorry, Cam. I still like you more than Jake.
Not shocking. All right, moving on to the next matchup. We have Big T versus Skullcap. Another matchup of people that were in the playoffs last year. Both teams have injury going on right now. So thought that was an interesting little storyline going on. Running through the quarterback position, Tom has CJ Stroud and Jacoby Brissett, who I made fun of him for drafting. And Sean has Lamar and Goff. I think Chicago's a rough defense. I actually have Sean with a pretty decent advantage in this specific matchup. I think Goff will have a pretty big week at home. Lamar is against Vegas. Could see that being a big week. And then Stroud, I think, will have not an optimal week against Chicago.
Yeah, I think Sean probably has a pretty good advantage here. Like I think we've mentioned, Detroit, Tampa has all the makings of a shootout, and Lamar against Vegas is a pretty good matchup for him. Although Max Crosby and some of those Vegas defenders are willing to throw hands. That fight they had was crazy. But anyway, I think you covered CJ, and who knows what Jacoby Brissett puts up against Seattle. You move on to running back. You got Breece Hall and Derrick Henry for Tom against McCaffrey, assuming he plays, and Eckler for Sean. I think the combination of Hall and Henry is a pretty good advantage here for Tom. This is probably one where CMC, even with his injury, probably outscores, is the highest scorer, but the combination of Hall and Henry beats McCaffrey and Eckler is my prediction there.
Yep, I like the Hall and Henry side as well. I really don't know if Christian McCaffrey is actually going to end up playing in this game. So it's a really big advantage if McCaffrey doesn't play, because I think his next running back is like Chuba Hubbard or something like that. So we're predicting on Tuesday, which isn't always great, but I'm still going to go an advantage to Tom either way. I think Breece is right up there with McCaffrey anyway, so especially he's going to come back. He's not going to play a full workload. I'd have Breece as the top running back, and I definitely have Henry over Eckler here. Moving on to wide receiver, Tom has Rashee Rice and Drake London. Rashee Rice looks like the wide receiver one there. I think that's pretty nice to have that. On Sean's side, they have Amon-Ra and Mike Evans. I think wide receiver 2 is a really big advantage for Sean. Receiver 1s, you probably lean Amon-Ra there, but Rashee Rice could end up having a really big year. Wouldn't be surprised about that at all.
Yeah, I think Sean has a huge advantage at wide receiver. And I'll just leave it at that. I think it's a huge advantage. At tight end, I'm going to say the same thing. You said Rashee Rice is receiver 1. That is, I think, still incorrect. Travis Kelce is still wide receiver 1, even though he's starting to show some decline. I'm still picking him every day of the week, and I'm giving Sean a huge advantage with Travis Kelce over Cole Kmet at tight end as well. And I'll just finish it off so you can as well. Tom has a minimal advantage with Aaron Jones over Calvin Ridley at the flex, but I don't think either one of them has a big day.
Yep, I could definitely see that. I mean, Aaron Jones goes up against San Francisco. That's a really rough matchup. And Calvin Ridley goes up against the Jets, which is also a rough matchup. So tough matchups in the flex, probably not a ton of points. So it really kind of seems like it's coming down to running back versus receiver. I went and predicted that Tom would win this game.
And I predicted Sean. I think Sean's quarterbacks are going to put up at least 30 more points, 20 to 30 more points than Tom's. And I'm going to say 20 more points. 30 is crazy. And with the receiver and tight end advantage, I think Sean has a little too much firepower for Tom this week due to Tom's quarterback injuries. Bringing us to our next game, we've got myself against Lamin. So this is really to figure out.
This isn't you, but do the next one.
That is me. I'm right there. Okay, we have Trevor against Taint, because Jake is bad at filling out documents, and I'm just going off what he filled out. So at quarterback, we have Rodgers and Daniel Jones for Trevor against Tua and Herbert for Taint, or Purdy, for that matter, for Taint. But Taint with a huge upgrade over Trevor at quarterback. This is another one where I'm not surprised if this is just a complete and total blowout at the quarterback position.
I think that Trevor's quarterbacks are going to keep it close here. Against Tennessee and Washington, I could see them having somewhat decent games, around 15-ish points each. Nothing crazy, but respectable enough games. I could see both of them having that. He still has Herbert in the lineup. Like I said before, I'd be going Purdy personally. I think Tua is a good start this week. I think if he went Purdy, I'd have a bigger advantage, but I'm going to say a minimal advantage to Bryce on the quarterbacks.
I am going advantage Bryce with running backs with Kyren Williams and Gibbs over Saquon and Ramondre. Saquon's not putting up 32 again, and I don't think Ramondre is going to have the game he had week 1. So I think Williams and Gibbs are more likely to be good. So I'm picking Taint this week. And I'm not going into too much detail as we're taking too long and I'm trying to push this along.
I like Saquon and Ramondre. I don't really care that much about the matchups. I think they're all close enough. I think Saquon's could score another 30. I think that O-line was looking pretty good. I think Ramondre seems like he's getting all the work. I don't think Gibbs is going to get all the work, and Kyren is going to get all the work, but I'm not sure he has the biggest week this week. Moving on to receiver, Trevor has Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, Bryce has Jamar Chase, and Michael Pittman. I am going to go with Trevor here as well. I think this is a big week for Garrett Wilson. I think him and Rodgers find a way to connect this week. 11 targets last week. I think Devontae has a bigger week this week. It was the first week with his new quarterback. Still like Bryce's receivers a lot. Well, I like Chase a lot. I don't really like Pittman, but that's my difference.
Go Trevor as well here. Like Wilson and Devontae, I have more faith in them to beat Jamar and Pittman. None of them are matchups I super care about. Maybe Devontae has the toughest matchup here with Baltimore, but I don't super care about any of them. And hopefully Minshew figures out to throw him the ball more, because he's pretty good. And moving on to tight end, Kittle versus Taysom Hill as we speak right now. Kittle, I think, is still Kittle, and I pick him over Taysom Hill. Although, who knows? Taysom Hill is funky, and then I'll just do my flex. I'm going Bryce with Spears to beat Shakur. I have more confidence Spears probably ends up in the end zone, which is pretty much how I predict flex.
Agree. I went Trevor. I think that the quarterbacks won't be that far apart, and then like I said, I like the running backs for Trevor and the receivers for Trevor more, and the tight end. So I just went with Trevor.
I went with Taint.
All right, moving on to your game. The underperformer versus the overperformer. Are we going to have a repeat of last week or not? Going to the quarterbacks, you have Trevor against Cleveland and Kirk against Philly. Hard to have faith in Kirk at this point, and hard to have faith on Trevor, at least against the Browns. I think that Lamb Chop has the advantage here. Jaden Daniels against the Giants. The Giants are awful. And then we've been talking about the Detroit-Tampa game enough with Baker.
Yeah, Lamb beats me here by a good margin. Moving on to running back. Right now I have ETN and Brian Robinson starting, which is, kind of scary. But he has Charbonnet and Algier. I give myself a pretty decent advantage here. Mostly because I think combined his running backs maybe score 10 points. So I think mine may get to like 22. So by decent advantage, I mean double his, but just double because his doesn't score very much.
Agree. Moving on to receiver, it's Jefferson and Harrison versus Reed and Worthy, I presume. Yeah, Jordan Love's out. Hard to imagine Jaden Reed has that much of a good game. Worthy, maybe he goes crazy and makes up some of the difference, but I have to imagine you have probably the two best receivers in the matchup.
I agree completely. Justin Jefferson, as spelled by Jacob on the document, is the best receiver in football, always and forever. And Marvin Harrison, they are going to force the ball to him a little bit more this week after seeing him be open 700 times and Kyler just turning around and scrambling more. Moving on to tight end, I think Brock Bowers beats out Fryermuth. Matchups be damned. Brock Bowers beats out Fryermuth, and I think I'm going DJ Moore over Ladd McConkey, just because even though McConkey plays Carolina, I think DJ Moore, it looked to be Caleb's number one receiver, and I assume that offense looks a little more polished in week 2. So I'll go DJ Moore after going Bowers at tight end.
I will also go Bowers and DJ Moore. I don't think we have to talk about it too much. Prediction wise, I went U. I think should be I'm going to go a 15-point win.
So I went Lemon because I never beat Lemon, and that's my only reasoning. He beats me and Tom no matter what happens in the league, and so I'm picking Lemon. Which brings us to what you classified as uncompetitive expectations. We have Danny versus Biondi. The quarterback, you have Patrick Mahomes and Caleb Williams for Danny versus Richardson and Watson for Biondi. I think Caleb Williams turns it around a little bit more against Houston, and I can almost see that game becoming more shootout-ish with him and Stroud. And I'm going with Danny having the advantage, quarterback by a pretty good margin, thinking that it's going to be 2 pretty high-scoring quarterbacks versus 1.
Yeah, I don't like Caleb Williams. I've decided to become a Caleb Williams hater now. So I don't think he'll be that great, but I still think Danny will have slightly better quarterback play. Richardson probably scores the most points, maybe, in this game out of the quarterbacks, but I am super scared about Deshaun. I do not know what is going on there. I don't know what's happened to him, but I don't trust him at all. Moving to running backs, Danny has Jaylen Warren and Blake Corum. This is a complete blowout versus Bijan Robinson and Joe Mixon. Yeah, Danny doesn't have starting running backs, so I don't even know if we have to really discuss this. It's clearly Steve.
Yep, Biondi wins that by 30 points. And moving on to receiver, Olave and Nico Collins for Biondi versus Devontae and Zay Flowers. I think I would go Danny in this particular matchup. Olave didn't look great even in their blowout, so grain of salt. And I still don't trust Nico Collins, even though Diggs only got a couple targets and, Tank Dell got a bunch of targets. I just don't know where the 3 of them fit in right now in that offense. And then Zay Flowers still looks like a pretty great target for Lamar in a game that we think Lamar is going to go crazy. And then Devontae Smith, I'm just predicting pretty decent things for the passing game for the Philly this week and not so much the running game. Don't know why, just what I'm feeling.
I like it. I'm going to go with these are wrong. I'm going to go with the receiver advantage for Steve. I think Steve's receivers are just more trustworthy. I think week to week, Flowers and Smith will be a little less projectable. So I'm going to go that way.
Yeah, Jake also messed up the flex position in this matchup, so we're having to look up who's playing flex here.
Use the tight ends.
Yeah, well, I don't really care about the tight ends. Jonnu versus Dalton Schultz. I think Dalton Schultz is better, and he'll have a better week. And Kenneth Walker for Biondi is going to smoke George Pickens for Danny. Don't even bother writing it down. Although you put Kamara in there, so maybe Kamara outplays Kenneth Walker. And if it's Kamara, I pick Pickens. If it's Kenneth Walker, I pick Danny. I pick Biondi. So I don't think it matters. Biondi's going to win this game by a good margin.
Same. All right. Sounds good.
We're done.
We did
have
it.
to be better at that.